Howdy, it's Kyle, going over the richest neighborhoods in a handful of cities in the US. Most YouTubers will focus on poverty and crime and homelessness, and let's take a look at these abandoned buildings and make fun of all these poor people. But what I thought I would do here is take a look at the humans that really matter in the world and take a look at where some of these poor, downtrodden folks are forced to live. So what I did was I took a look at the median household income for different parts of the city, as well as the median house value to determine what might be the wealthiest neighborhood in that city. And I looked at just the city limits of the central city of that metro. So for most metros, the wealthiest part is going to be a far off exurb or maybe along a lake or up on a mountain out west or something. But I looked at just the interior city limit itself to see what might be the wealthiest part of a handful of big cities in the US. I'm going to start off in Chicago because this was the most difficult one to do for the video, and that's because the highest income part of the city is the Loop, or the most interior part of the CBD. This is where you have a lot of multi-million dollar condos in high-rise buildings, and some of Chicago's biggest movers and shakers live there. However, for the sake of this video, I was looking more at residential type neighborhoods, more single family houses, and for Chicago, the wealthiest area in terms of income and housing value is Old Town. There's a spot called the Old Town Triangle south of Oz Park, and also near there is Branch Triangle. And as the name suggests, this is one of the oldest parts of the city. Some of the oldest homes are very well kept and very expensive. Most of the homes are Victorian age, mid to late 19th century, so they aren't necessarily on huge lots with huge gardens, but they are beautiful old homes. For most cities, including Chicago, the absolute wealthiest parts of the metro area are going to be outside of the city limits proper, and for Chicago, once you go immediately north of the city limits is where you have the absolute wealthiest parts of the metro. However, for the city of Chicago, the wealthiest part in terms of income is again the more CBD Loop area with some of the condos, but the wealthiest part of town for income and also house value is Old Town. Next, I'm going to Boston because it's unique for this video. It's the only city in this list where the absolute wealthiest neighborhood in the city is right next to the downtown. Specifically, I'm talking about the neighborhoods of Back Bay and Beacon Hill. These are west and north of Boston Common, the big public park right downtown on the east bank of the Charles River. These are some of the oldest homes in the city, and with Boston being such a historic place, many of the most desirable places are going to be some of those old homes. The Back Bay neighborhood was developed as a wealthy neighborhood. It was on reclaimed land because Boston didn't really have a ton of land to work with. Most of it was built up in the late 19th century, so many Victorian homes. So it's similar to Chicago in that the most desirable part of the city itself, the most expensive homes, are some of the oldest homes. Most of the homes in the Back Bay area are going to be in the millions of dollars. Some of the smaller condo ones might be under, but it's a really expensive place to be. But also being right next to downtown, it's also a commercial district with some upscale shopping, hotels, and restaurants. So Back Bay is sitting right there on the Charles River, so if you like that dirty water, well then, Boston's your home. Okay, so now I want to go over to Detroit to check out where some of the wealthy neighborhoods are. When you think about Detroit, rich neighborhoods are probably not the first thing you think of, but there actually are some pretty wealthy neighborhoods in the city, and the wealthiest one is Palmer Woods. This is in the far north central part of the city, north of Palmer Park and near the University of Detroit Mercy campus. And a pretty common theme you're going to see throughout this video is that most of the wealthiest neighborhoods are near a large park or green space. But with housing values in Detroit being relatively low, you can get a really nice fancy house here for 6 figures. And I'm certainly no real estate expert, but I can imagine buying a house like this for under $1 million may be a wise investment because I can't see these things being under $1 million for too much longer. Some of the neighborhoods right next to Palmer Woods, including Sherwood Forest and Green Acres to the west, are also pretty nice. However, this is a relatively small neighborhood, and most of the ultra-wealthy people in the Detroit area live outside of the city in either the Grosse Pointe or the far northwest suburbs. But despite all of the troubles of Detroit through the years, there's always been pockets of money in the city, and Palmer Woods is where you have the biggest pocket of it. So we'll go from Detroit, one of the poorest cities in the country, to San Diego, one of the wealthiest. Just a normal middle-class home in San Diego is going to cost you $1 million, so the most expensive parts of town are going to be several million. And for San Diego, the northwestern portion of the city around La Jolla and Hidden Valley is the wealthiest part of a wealthy city. La Jolla is a really trendy part of town right there along the beach, a nice cove where seals swim up to. It has many expensive restaurants and shops, and overall the whole downtown of La Jolla, if you would call it that, is very upscale. But the wealthiest housing in the San Diego area are in the hills above La Jolla, again especially Hidden Valley. This is south of the campus of UC San Diego, south of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And for San Diego, this is one where the actual wealthiest part of the entire metro is within the city of San Diego itself, right here in La Jolla. I just showed a handful of beautiful giant mansions in Detroit for under $1 million, but you want that same house in San Diego, it'll be at least $10 million. And so with that, the most expensive parts of San Diego are some of the most expensive real estate in the entire world. Okay, now I'm going to the southeast and Atlanta. In general, the northern half of the city of Atlanta is the wealthier part, and the Buckhead neighborhood is the wealthiest part of North Atlanta, but within Buckhead, the wealthiest part is Tuxedo Park. So if you're going to have the wealthiest neighborhood within one of the wealthiest neighborhoods, well, you might as well call it Tuxedo Park. And this area was created to be an exclusive area, so if you're going to give a name Tuxedo Park, you're probably not building it for the masses. And this is just south of Chastain Park, so another big green space that many of the richest people want to live near. When most people think of Buckhead, it's usually the more commercial district, the busy street, the fancy shops, the expensive malls. But when you get to the more residential portions of Buckhead, especially to the west off of West Paces Ferry Road, it gets really expensive, including the most expensive part, Tuxedo Park. I'm going to go one state down to Florida and Tampa. Lots of money in Florida, lots of money especially along the coast, and the wealthiest part of Tampa are the Davis Islands. They're located in the bay just south of downtown, so close to the action but separated from it. And what this is a single man-made island with many canals going through it, so it technically separates them into multiple islands, and it's called the Davis Islands. The canals going through it have private docks on waterways. On the islands there's a jet port and a yacht club. So you can cruise around your neighborhood in your boat going down some of these canals. There is a commercial street with some small shops and businesses, but most of these islands are just homes. But the Tampa Bay metro area is another one where the absolute wealthiest people don't live in the city of Tampa itself, but more on sea islands off the coast. But as you can imagine, this is a major hurricane hazard area, and multiple storms, including most recently Hurricane Helene in 2024, did major damage to the Davis Islands. Wealthier people tend to have insurance and are able to rebuild, so I do expect Davis Islands to be rebuilt and still have many really expensive houses. Heading back west, I'm going to Denver, Colorado, and its wealthiest neighborhood of Cherry Creek. Cherry Creek is a water feature that runs through this portion of the city, and the wealthiest part of this wealthy part of town is Cherry Creek North. And this is another wealthy area that's surrounded by big parks. It's located between the Denver Botanic Gardens and Congress Park. And then to the south, you have the Denver Country Club golf course. So when you have that much park and green space around you, you can be in the middle of a city but still have a little more peace and quiet with just fewer cars and businesses and things going on around you. But like many wealthy residential areas, there's also an upscale shopping area to go along with it. And that's the same case here. You have many of the really expensive chain stores at the Cherry Creek Mall. Denver is already a pretty expensive city, and a pretty standard middle-class home might cost well over $500,000, but to get to a part of town like Cherry Creek in the south central part of the city, it's going to cost you well over $1 million, if not $2 million. But yeah, Cherry Creek and Cherry Creek North District of Denver in the south central part of the city, wealthiest part of town. I'm going to head 2 states over to Missouri and look at the wealthiest parts of St. Louis. And for here, the wealthiest part of town is Compton Heights near Compton Hill Park. This is near the east and northeast end of Tower Grove Park, a pretty big park in the city. And nearby in this part of the city is the Central West End and Midtown, so a lot of the cooler neighborhoods in St. Louis are right around this wealthy part of Compton Heights. And St. Louis, kind of like Detroit, is a place where you can get a really big mansion for really not that much money comparatively. And kind of like Detroit, you can get a beautiful old mansion for well under $1 million. I really like St. Louis. It's a city that has a lot of problems. It's high poverty and really high crime, but there are some really good things going for it, including some nice neighborhoods, some old historic neighborhoods, and really affordable housing. And you can even get into, again, the wealthiest part of the city, Compton Heights, for well under $1 million. So you hear that, LA? In Denver, you want to be in South Central, and in St. Louis, you want to be in Compton. Now I'm going down to Houston, Texas, and its wealthiest part of town, and that's called West Oaks. Houston, as well as Dallas, has multiple enclave cities, places that are completely surrounded by the much larger city, but they are independent jurisdictions, and for Houston and Dallas are almost always really wealthy. In Houston, there's what's called the Memorial Villages, a handful of small independent towns surrounded by Houston, and the ultra wealthiest one is called Hunter Creek Village. But again, these are outside of the city of Houston, and the wealthiest part of the city of Houston is West Oaks. This is in the part of Houston right near these memorial villages, so it's in that same general wealthy part of the metro area. And just like most of the other neighborhoods I'll mention, there's a lot of green space around it. West Oaks is just west of Memorial Park and the big Arboretum. Nearby is the Houston Country Club golf course. And this part of town feels almost exurban, even though you're pretty close to the middle of town. And this is another neighborhood where a measly $1 or $2 million get you nowhere. Better have at least $5 million. Big money in Texas, big money in Houston, and the biggest money in the city is in West Oaks. Now I'm headed to one of my favorite cities in the country, that's Pittsburgh. And the wealthiest part of the city here is Squirrel Hill North and Shadyside in the east central part of the city. And this is another neighborhood that's located between two big parks. Just west of it is Shenley Park and just east is Frick Park. Those are the two biggest parks in the city, and that's a really nice spot to be right between the two. Squirrel Hill is divided between north and south. North is where you have a lot of the big fancy homes. South is where you have more of a commercial district, a really cool street with local shops and restaurants, including my friend's game shop there. Check it out. Games Unlimited. And for Pittsburgh, this is one city where my favorite part of town is this wealthiest part of the city. So if I were to move to Pittsburgh and had unlimited money, this is probably where I would live. The neighborhood adjacent to Squirrel Hill North is called Shadyside, and it's pretty similar, some old, big, fancy homes. Pittsburgh isn't quite as cheap as Detroit or St. Louis, but it's nowhere near as expensive as some of these other places. You can get a really nice home in this part of town in the $1 million range. That's still a ton of money, but nowhere near as much as some other cities. So yeah, Pittsburgh, a city I like a lot, and my favorite part of the city is also the wealthiest, Squirrel Hill North. Okay, I'm going to head back to the West Coast and Portland, Oregon. And for here, the wealthiest neighborhood in the city is the Portland Heights part of the Southwest Hills neighborhood. This is located in some hills southwest of downtown, and like the other places I mentioned, between some parks. It's southeast of Washington Park where the big zoo is, and it's west of Marquand Nature Park. So you have a beautiful setting with homes and mountains, parks on both sides, and the downtown just right down the hill. So Portland is certainly an expensive city, but it's nowhere near as expensive as Seattle, San Francisco, or San Diego, so you can get a really nice home in this part of Portland Heights for just a measly $3 million. So Portland is cheaper than Seattle, has better weather, and is less seismically at risk. So yeah, Portland Heights in the Southwest Hills part of the city, richest part of Portland, gorgeous setting. So now I'm headed back to the Midwest and Cleveland, Ohio. And for Cleveland, the wealthiest part of the city is a northwestern corner right along the shore of Lake Erie, Gold Coast, and Edgewater. I wanted to highlight Cleveland because there really isn't any single part of the city that is ultra wealthy with really expensive homes and high incomes. This part of town along the lake, the Gold Coast and Edgewater areas are very nice, but the homes here aren't super ultra luxury. There is a decent amount of money in the Cleveland metro area, but like many of these other ones, the biggest money is outside of the city in the suburbs. And the Edgewater Park area is nice. There's a lakefront beach there. You're close to the Detroit Shoreway, Ohio City, some interesting neighborhoods there. But from a real estate standpoint, there just really isn't a whole lot of high dollar stuff in the city. In fact, some of the most expensive real estate in Cleveland are newer condos downtown. I do like Cleveland. I think it's one of the most underrated cities in the country, a very underrated downtown, but there isn't a ton of money in the city itself. But the best part of town, if you do have a lot of money, is going to be the Gold Coast Edgewater Beach area in the northwest part of the city. So now I want to go back down south to another poor city, and that's Memphis, Tennessee. But Memphis is more like Detroit than Cleveland in this because there is a really fancy, wealthy, rich neighborhood in the city of Memphis itself. The neighborhoods of Whitmar, Massey Hill, and Eastwood Manor in the east end of the city are really upscale. And like most of the other places I mentioned, it's near some parks and green space. Whitmar and Massey Hill are just south of the huge Shelby Farms Park, and it's also near Lucius Birch State Natural Area. But also in this neighborhood, you're east of a large cemetery. So you're surrounded by a lot of non-residential, non-commercial stuff, and in this area is also the Hunt and Polo Club of Memphis. Most of the biggest money in Memphis Metro is east of the city of Memphis into the suburbs, but you do have some big money in Memphis, especially in this Whitmar Massey Hill district. People don't normally associate Memphis with big money and high dollar stuff. Usually it's low income, high crime, but there is a really wealthy part of the city. Next, I'm going to go back to the Midwest and Indianapolis. And this one's a bit strange because Meridian Hills is a separate city. It's an incorporated town that's an enclave of Indianapolis, but at the same time it's also part of the consolidated government with Indianapolis. I'm not sure how it all works in the details. I'm sure it pretty much comes out in favor of Meridian Hills, but Meridian Hills is the richest part of Indianapolis. In the far northeast part of the city, along a lake, there's a neighborhood called Geist, which is also very wealthy. Part of this neighborhood is in the city and part of it is not. Part of the lake is and isn't in the city limits, so I'm going with Meridian Hills for the wealthiest part of the interior part of the city. But broken record here, Meridian Hills is surrounded by green space. It's just east of Merritt Woods Natural Preserve and just north of Holiday Park. And common for neighborhoods like this is to have a large country club for golfers nearby, and that's the case here for Meridian Hills. So whether it be a golf course or a park, it's just more space that people aren't going to live in and businesses aren't going to be located in. Often people associate money in Indianapolis with the suburbs of Carmel and Fishers to the north, and those are more your typical true suburbs, but in terms of the interior of the city, Meridian Hills is the wealthiest part. I'm going to go to the northeast for this last one, and Buffalo, New York. For Buffalo, the wealthiest parts of the city are called Albright and Park Meadow, directly south and north of the big Delaware Park. Albright is at the northern end of the Elmwood Village area, a pretty cool trendy part of town. This is north of the Central Business District and again south of the huge Delaware Park, and it's east of Soldier Circle and a couple of parkways. So another case of rich folks wanting to be near some parks. So for the case of Albright, you're basically surrounded by green space on all sides, so it makes the urban setting of Buffalo seem a little bit farther away. But similar to Cleveland, there isn't a whole lot of big money within the city of Buffalo itself, so some of the most expensive parts of town, some of the most expensive real estate isn't super expensive compared to many other parts of the country. It's not quite as cheap as Cleveland, but you can get a pretty significant piece of real estate for $1 million. And right next to that, in Delaware Park, is a big cemetery where none other than Rick James is buried. This gravestone is pretty fitting for the man, and even in death, Rick James would accept nothing less than to be buried in the wealthiest part of Buffalo. So whether it be San Diego, Houston, or Tampa, where you need at least $10 million for a nice house, or Cleveland, Buffalo, or Detroit, where you only need $1 million, the wealthiest parts of these cities are really nice. So that was my look at the richest part of the city for just a handful of big cities in the U.S. And I'll probably come back to this topic to go over a handful of other cities, and I might even do the worst part of each city for you masochists out there. But if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography from a nerd. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. As always, thank you very much.